we get going, please turn off your cell phones and pagers. Today is the second forum of the season and part 2 on parenting and education. In addition to our conversation this morning, we will be welcoming Dr. Norton Grove of UC Berkeley, and he will be discussing his bestseller, The Education Gospel. At this time, I'd like to ask you to please welcome our moderator, Alan Jones, and today's guest, Dr. Madeline Levine.
Many of you in the audience, both online and here at Grace Cathedral, may remember that last season we had a New York Times writer, Alistair Court, where we discussed gifted children, as well as how children are being marketed to from the time that they're in preschool. Today, stories of preteen girls demanding Prada and Coach handbags seem to be normal. We want our children to attend the best schools, participate in arts and other activities, and achieve at the highest level. But when does coming from means cross the line to a sense of entitlement? This book, The Price of Privilege by Madeline Levine, when I looked at the title and the subtitle in particular, How Parental Pressure and Material Advantage Are Creating a Generation of Disconnected and Unhappy Kids, part of me said, why should I care? I have to confess, that's not a good reaction. But this book, I really want you to, I'm going to urge you to buy it, because it is actually a prism through which one can see so many of the issues and problems of society. It really isn't just about privileged rich kids, it's about the sicknesses of our society. So it's a pleasure to welcome Madeline Levine to the forum today. She has a practice in Marin and has been practicing for some 25 years. She's the author of several books, including this one, The Price of Privilege, which will be at the heart of our conversation this morning. So, Madeline, thanks for joining us. I wanted to sort of start off with that reaction of mine to the title, and then what I found in the book itself, and to ask you, how this relates to, let's put it this way, rather crudely, this book really isn't just about rich kids. What is it about, you say?
Well, it's not about rich kids at all, actually. It's about middle-class kids.
Actually, we can't. We make sure you're switched on. Are we switched on? Technology. Here it comes in. No. It's on. We'll figure that thing out. Good.
The values of flexibility. So the book never was supposed to be about rich kids. Nobody actually knows anything about wealthy kids. Nobody's ever looked at them. The assumption has always been that poverty imposes such severe challenges on child development and parenting that one would find tremendous both parenting problems and psychological problems on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. And the corollary to that has always been that parents who were educated and had some money would offer a protective effect on their child's development. The kids that are looked at in this book are kids with incomes of $120,000 to $160,000, which in the Bay Area would not be considered affluent. There are plenty of places in this country where it would, but it isn't here. I want to make a point about why we actually should care about those kids anyway. And that's because those kids, first of all, if we love children, we love all children, right? A broken child is a broken child regardless of what their parents' income is. But the other reason that we should care is because those kids, in fact, because of their parents' education and opportunities and money, disproportionately go on to be in positions of authority. So they will be our policymakers, and they will be our politicians and our doctors and our lawyers. So it's in their best interest, as it is for all children, to be well, but it's also in the interest of all of us who hope to have a doctor with a sense of empathy as opposed to entitlement, that they grow up both healthy in terms of their own development, but also with a sense of conscience and connectedness. The second part of your question, which is how is this a bigger issue, I think is about the fact that it's an issue of what's happened to the culture and the kinds of things that have become more valued and the kinds of things that have become less valued. And for many of these kids, I'm sure we'll get to this, but the issue is that what has become so valued in their lives has very little to do with the things that we generally think of as character. They have to do with performance. And so what becomes greatly valued is how well one looks, the grades, not whether you're a good person or not, the school that you go to, not whether or not it's a good match or you're happy with it. And most of all, the incredible emphasis on material goods. You said Coach bag. I'm not talking about kids who were satisfied with a Coach bag. The girl that we shot a documentary yesterday, her bag, in fact, was a Jimmy Choo bag, which goes for about $2,000. So the sense of entitlement that these kids have, and it's not just entitlement, it's just the sort of constant parade of materialistic stuff as a stand-in for what you really hope kids are about, and parent-child relationships are about, and that's about connection. So this girl was talking about how whenever she feels down, and I think many of us do this, whenever we feel down, we go shopping. We have a president who, when our country was attacked, told us to go shopping. Shopping, my husband's out there, he can attest to the fact that I don't mind going shopping. I like to go shopping. But the problem is when shopping becomes a way of dealing with unhappy feelings. The common retail therapy. Shopping is no therapy at all, and materialism is no therapy. And what we know about kids who are materialistic is that they do worse on all the measures that we'd like to see kids do well on, like attachment and grades and social relationships, but they're also the least altruistic of any group of kids.
And what are other characteristics of that generation of parents? Also, where did that idea come from that you can buy anything? You can buy them a place at Harvard or Brown or wherever. I mean, the kind of thing, the attitude that everything can be bought, even your grade.
Yeah, but you and I were just talking about this before. I've just come back from New York, where I spoke at one of the most prestigious schools there, and I think I'm not all that naive. I've been talking about this for a while, but I was absolutely appalled and shocked by things that, I think some people know are the case, which is, in fact, you can buy your way into an Ivy League school. I spoke with several parents who said, what you do, I'm like, what? And, they're like, what you do is instead of attaching the check for $175 with your child's application, you attach a check for $1,075,000, and you just staple it on. And the tutors in New York City at some of these schools, I was just telling Alan, are $700, $800, and $1,000 an hour to tutor kids who aren't failing, but who are doing well to make sure they maintain their position. Now, how a parent has come to think that this is a good idea for their child, I think I don't have the full answer to that. But what I do know is that the easy answer is, well, it's my generation, do your own thing, instant gratification, birth control came in, drugs came in, and everything happened fast. So the feeling is, we don't have a lot of ability to delay gratification and stuff like that. That's the sort of spoiled theory of all these parents. Are some of these parents narcissistic? For sure. But I think the bigger issue is how incredibly worried they are about their children. And at least in my office, once you get past that, well, I want my child to go to the best college, and it's like, why? Well, everybody has a bumper sticker, and it's, you know what, you can just call Harvard and get a bumper sticker sent to you for 75 cents. So I think, in fact, these parents are tremendously worried about whether or not their kid's going to be able to make it in the world. First of all, they know that because of their sort of constant intervention, their kids don't have the kinds of self-management skills that people need out in the world. You can get good grades. It doesn't say anything about the real skills that, everybody here as an adult that you need in the world to be successful in, what we call EQ now, emotional intelligence. And I think parents, you ask parents and you say, what do you want for your child? And every parent, of course, answers by saying, I want my child to be happy, which is what we all want for our children. Unfortunately, fortunately, it's not unfortunately, the correlation between the school you go to and life happiness is exactly zero. There is absolutely no correlation between the school you go to and how happy you are in life when they look at you at 30 and 40 and 50. So there's this misperception that going to the right school is going to make you happier. And then if you dig a little deeper with parents and say, okay, I know you want your kids to be happy, but what else? And they say, well, I know that if they go to Yale or if they go to Princeton, they're going to be more financially comfortable. Their life is going to be easier. And once again, the University of Michigan's done a longitudinal study, and it shows that correlation between the school you go to and your lifetime earnings is zero. So we've been sold a bill of goods. Now, who has sold us this bill of goods? There is a huge industry. You pay $10,000 and your kid schleps. Schleps, it means you sort of...
We know what schleps.
You wander all over the country, get dragged all over the country, and you see 15 different schools in 2 weeks, and so, that's 10 grand. These tutors are very expensive. The SAT prep course is very expensive. The coach that you get for your kids to make sure they stay on the varsity team is expensive. U.S. World News Report has that awful, don't buy it. Don't buy it. The grading of schools, as if one could say what the best school is. As if that exists in a vacuum. The best school is not a prize. The school's a match. And so this notion that you can choose the best school, it's the best school for who? And interested in what? And what kind of learner? So, one thing is I think there's an enormous industry that is profiting from this level of anxiety. And I think parents in general are just terribly anxious, as we all should be with some validity, about the future, about the environmental future, the political future, the social future, and the financial future of their kids. But the level of anxiety is crazy.
Well, the fact that we use a phrase here that we outsource our work that we need to do, so we pay someone to do these things. One of the things that struck me in your book was this issue where we get, or with kids, where we get our validation, how we, that inner sense of validation. And it seems to me in our culture, we do need to foster genuine autonomy, but there's a kind of autonomy of the false self, where there's this spurious freedom. I will be free if I have so much money, or I'll be free if I have that particular product. And I think that it seems to me that there is this spurious and false self that is promulgated and encouraged.
And it's very problematic because, at the heart of this book, I'm a psychologist, I'm interested in the development of the self. And the book opens with the story of, I've been thinking about writing this for several years, but I work in Marin County, and I did not want to write a book about, nutty Marin County. We have enough bad press without my adding to it. So I really needed to wait until there was a body of research that supported what I felt I was seeing and what people around, not just me, what people around the country were seeing. And ultimately, in the last 6-7 years, there has been a large body of research supporting the idea that upper middle class kids have the highest rates of depression and anxiety and substance abuse and cutting and psychosomatic disorders of any group of kids in this country. And that was found out, by the way, by accident, like a lot of things in science. The woman who is a main researcher in this topic is named Sonia Luther. She's from Columbia. And she had made her career studying kids at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. And so she wanted to, sort of as researchers sometimes do to boost their results, she wanted them to make them look even more impaired. So she compared them to upper middle class kids with the assumption that this would really pop her findings. And to her shock, on every measure that she looked at, it looked worse. Right. So the question you would ask was about the false self. So all of this is kind of brewing out there, and but I don't have a name for it. I can't really get my arms around what it is I'm seeing that's different. I just know after 25 years of practicing that the kids who are coming into my office, they just look different. It used to be the diagnosis of depression was something you made like this in a teenager because they looked lousy and their grades were failing, and it was an easy diagnosis. Now kids come in and they look
sharp.
Yeah, they look like, they're very, hello, Dr. Levine, it's a pleasure to meet you. I mean, they've got really good social skills. So I had this 15-year-old girl come in this way, but she's wearing a cutter shirt, which is a shirt that's pulled very low over the arm with a hole for the thumb, and it hides cutting, which usually takes place either on the wrist or on the forearm. And so I talked to her for a while, and that shirt's a dead giveaway. And I finally said, what's going on? Do you want to show me what's under your shirt? And she pulls it back. And just that morning, so it was still sort of gross, she had taken a razor and incised the word empty into her arm. And she then became sort of I didn't know what word to use. She became the model for what I was looking at, which was a kid who, for all the world, looked good, had good social skills, was well-dressed, but you pull back her sleeve and she's bleeding. And so I think for many of these kids, they're very successful at the creation of a
persona,
of a facade of what in psychology we call a false self. False self is highly correlated with depression, and it's trickier to identify these kids, and it's trickier for parents to know that their kids are having difficulty because these kids do a good job of maintaining grades, often because they're doing something like cocaine, which allows them to party all night and then stay up and do their studying and things like that. But I think it's also a little bit an example of all of our superficiality that we so easily let these kids sort of pass by us in school, pass by us at home. In Tiburon, there was a kid who everybody knew was selling drugs. Everybody, it's not that big a community. And, nobody could convince the parents because she was an A student and she did have a lot of friends. And it wasn't until she stole her neighbor's keys, copied the keys for the Ferrari, and led the cops on a high-speed chase down 101, ending up on a brick wall and in intensive care, that the parents were willing to say, in spite of
real evidence.
Right.
Is it that the parents too are kind of addicted to velocity? Their lifestyle is so fast.
That's a nice phrase, addicted to velocity.
Yeah, I wish I had thought of it because a friend of mine used it, but he talked about himself being addicted to velocity, that speed of life. It's not they don't care about their children, but they're just not there. Is that what it is?
Sure, I think often they're not there, and I think that there is an enormous difference between being physically present and being emotionally available to kids. And I think the exact same pressures will get to, why are these kids troubled? And, in a nutshell, it has to do with pressure and disconnection. But I think that's the same thing is true for parents, that we are working overtime, that our own lives go quickly, and that my favorite line in the book actually wasn't written by me, it was said by one of my patients who said, it's amazing that my mother is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. And so, we run around, we pick our kids up, so they don't have to walk 4 blocks to come home. And then we take them to lacrosse practice, and then we take them to the tutor, and then we take them to the SAT prep courses. And I mean, all of you who are moms, you know how that goes. I mean, you're like, get in the car, and I'm not going back for your cleats, and it's not an available moment. It's it's frantic and hassled, and that's not what kids need. I think kids need what I call in the book an inviting listening presence. And do we stop our lives to be inviting listening presences to our children? Of course not. But I strongly, when I talk to parents of younger kids, I strongly suggest that people start to ritualize a quiet, available time in their day to talk to kids. Now, some days that's going to be the day, on a weekend maybe when you're out on the mountain or whatever. And some days that's going to be 10 minutes, but I'm never sure if I'm supposed to say this because it tells you how late I let my own children stay up, but I have 3 sons, and it was Letterman, Leno, and now the Daily Show, and so don't tell anybody they stay up that late because
we get cable, the Daily Show's on at 8.
We're not watching it at 8. We're watching it at 11. And I when I talk to children being sleep deprived is an enormous thing in the field of psychology. Kids are sleep deprived. So anyway, they don't stay up for the whole show. I get in there at about 10:02. They're asleep by about 10 after. But that 20 minutes every day of my kids' lives, as long as I've been at home, which has been 99% of the time, I learned more about their lives than through all the hectic running around and getting to, courses and coaches and all this kind of stuff. So I encourage people to think about what constitutes really being available.
Good parenting. I like that you make a distinction in the book between authoritative and authoritarian parents. Could you talk a bit about that? Because the opposite, you could have a parent with, I don't know what the problem with kids who have, say, rigid parents.
They become bullies.
They then, that manifested the bullying behavior in their own lives. So that distinction between authoritarian and authoritative is a very important one.
So that, there's research from a long time ago, Diana Baumer from Cal, who years ago, and I think the categories are still useful, talked about the authoritative parent, the authoritarian parent, and the permissive parent. And the authoritarian parent is the parent who says, I make the rules, we do it my way. Those houses actually, when their kids are young, can be sort of well controlled because there's a lot of rules. Those parents are not particularly interested in their child having a voice in things, and they tend to be extremely rigid. And they tend to also use power as a way of forcing compliance, so whether that's physical power or psychological manipulation. Problem with those kids is they tend to be bullied just the way they were bullied in their own houses. Permissive parents, which is probably a lot of my generation, we tend to have, we talk to our kids a lot, the endless discussion. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and all she wanted to do was have her daughter come in at midnight, and a friend of mine here, George, who's in the audience, taught me years ago the line, nothing good happens after midnight, which has been a guiding light through raising 3 children. And this was, 15 minutes into the discussion she's having with her kid about, you have to be home, and this is, the accident rate goes up, and, on and on and on and on. That's the permissive parent, as opposed to nothing good happens after midnight, your curfew's midnight, you come home later than that, you're grounded the next week. And that's the permissive parent. And the fact about those parents are we tend to have very personable kids. We tend to have very creative kids. We also have incredibly immature kids who, because so much has been allowed to pass and so little is asked of them, that they don't have very good skills for sort of just managing through life. Their grades tend to not be as good. So the ideal model of parenting is sort of this equal division between warmth which, by the way, in psychology is considered the silver bullet. We have so few silver bullets in psychology. We have, we talk about parenting, but nobody knows how much parenting contributes to an outcome on a child. Nobody knows. We do know that 50% of kids, probably hardwired the way they are, do not make the assumption that you're the other 50%. The other 50% is a whole bunch of things. It's how you parent. It's a culture that is steeped in materialism and shows like the Super Sweet 16 or Pimp My Ride or Cribs, or Show the Good Life. And it depends whether your kid happens to sit next to a merit scholar or the local drug dealer in the 8th grade.
That hit me. One book, as a parent, and feeling my own failures as a parent, I took great comfort, whether it was false comfort, in a chapter in one of James Hillman's books, The Soul's Code, where there's a chapter called The Parental Fallacy. And I clung to it because it said, parents don't have as much influence as you think.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, we just don't know. However, parenting is the only thing we have control over. So if it's 10%, 5%, 25, 50, we don't know. But that's where we have control. So this sort of equal division in parenting between warmth, which we know is the basis of healthy child development. That's one thing we do know. And discipline, which is the tough side of parenting. Warmth is easy. That's when your kid runs up to you and says, you're the best mommy, you're the best daddy in the world, I love you so much, and it's fuzzy, and God, it's great. Yeah, I'm allowed to say that here. And that's the easy side. The hard side is discipline. Because that's when your kid says, I hate you, or closes their door on you, or rolls their eyes at you. And if you're feeling fragile yourself, if you don't have enough connection, if you don't have a community, if you don't have somebody to talk to, it's really tough to tolerate those kinds of ruptures with your kids. And that's why, a lot of this book at the end talks about, kids are having trouble, but the genesis of this has to do with parents who are feeling too fragile to be able to tolerate their kids' unhappiness, which is mandatory. I mean, that's the way life is. There are challenges, there are times when you are frustrated, there are times when your kid's unhappy. You have to be able to tolerate it and teach your kids to tolerate it.
I was surprised because it has both negative and positive effect that there was no reference in the book to religion. There were two things, I looked up in the index, 2 things about spirituality that I was just walking in passing. So there does seem to be a big hole in this book.
Yes.
Why is that, Doctor?
I think a very legitimate criticism of this book is its lack of attention to the faith-based communities. And when it comes out in paperback, some of that will be rectified. But it'll be rectified, frankly, because of my own experience in this. I mean, I'm Jewish, culturally Jewish, like a lot of Jewish people are, which means I show up on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. And I talk a lot about community. Join a community, be part of a community, you need to be part of a community. And the fact is, my epiphany came at St. John's Church in Ross. Now, at this point, I've spoken in a lot of churches, but that was my very first church, and I'd never been in a church. And I was just incredibly uncomfortable. I didn't know what anything was called. I didn't know where to stand. And I tend to talk with my hands a lot, and I would say something, and then I'd put my hand down, and it would be like on the top of an angel. And it was really scary.
I don't know how you can live with this.
I think actually because I was so uncomfortable, which means your senses are heightened, you're really attuned, as opposed to the ease that I feel in my shul, because my senses were really heightened. And I looked out just like this, and it was an absolutely packed thing because of various reasons. And I thought, what am I talking about? There's the community. I keep talking about community as if go out with a placard on you saying, I'm ready for community now. And I suppose one can, and there are many places to find community, but it really was an epiphany for me to say, the community's right in front of me. The community has been in my synagogue. The community is right here in this facility where the walls were just papered with projects that the kids were doing, with calls for community service, with all the kinds of things. So,
yeah. I mean, actually, I've been pulling your leg a bit because there is you don't use the word, but there is, I would say, a theme of very strong what I would call spirituality in the book. It's just that I think often I tell in the program I've been for prostate cancer, they talk about stress reduction because you can get funding for stress reduction rather than spirituality. That's where you can get the funding. But there is, it seems to me, the parents of these kids, because of that, the time they grew up in, rejecting religion on the whole, that there's, whatever traditions, there is a kind of parents with no traditions and no rituals.
Oh, I think that's true. I mean, on many levels, for people out here in California, most of them are from someplace else, so we don't have the parenting roots, we don't have the extended family, which sort of keeps that kind of thing going. And, church attendance is down, synagogue attendance is down. As people become increasingly frantic about grabbing the brass ring, I really think at the end of the day, this is about redefining what a successful life is. That we have so bought into the notion that success is the school you go to or the grade you go to, that it crowds out. It essentially just crowds out the time that people need to attend to other parts of life.
I'm having such a good time with you, but I'm going to open it up to everyone. But I want to say I'm preaching using a book today.
Wow.
3 things you said, which is to me at the heart of spirituality, that you don't, conscience, gratitude, and community. Those 3 things seem to me beautiful, humanizing, what is it to be a flourishing human being? The sense of conscience, a moral life, a moral compass, that ability to be grateful, and the issue of community and communion. And what struck me too is the absence of pleasure in these kids, the absence of just fun and joy. And well, I think we should. We're on to 2 mics. Oh, good. That's great. I'm coming back. Please, those of you listening on the internet, please send us your questions for Dr. Levine. You can do that easily. It's quite simple. And then please raise your hand really high and keep your question brief so we can have as many questions as possible. And wait until I count. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Levine. I think you're charming, by the way. Just yesterday, I was reading a poem from a very, very fine Renaissance poet in England, Herbert, called The Pearl. And in it, he mentions that the pursuit of learning, honor, and pleasure ultimately leaves us empty, because, like also, is uncorruptible. So there is the need for transcending, whether one calls it religion or high ethics or warmth. And it seems to me that the next book that you should write is precisely about the transcending power of transforming a child by recognizing that all of this stuff, as you mentioned, is actually very much subject to be disappointing to us as we ourselves disappointing to our children.
Thank you. I'll put you in touch with my editor. And thank you very much.
Good morning, Dr. Levine. I want to say I bought your book immediately last summer. We have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Previously, I was a high school math teacher, though, and I will tell you that the helicopter parent that you speak about is what drove me from teaching. I no longer teach because of over-involving parents. So I'm in a situation now, I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I just want to say that your book has opened a door, honestly, for me and my friends to start talking about the fears we have as parents, because my friends have 6-year-olds, and it's the private, schools already in kindergarten, and some of them are paying $12,000-$13,000 for kindergarten. I'm in the peninsula, but I just want to thank you for opening that door, because I think the conversation we're starting to have is sharing our fears as much as sharing our hopes for our kids.
Thank you.
We have 140 applicants for 22 places in kindergarten.
Really? The problem is we are losing our best teachers. I call it, no child left behind and no teacher left standing. It's a big problem.
Madeline, thank you. I'm enjoying this very much. One thing I've missed hearing about is children holding jobs. I have 3 children in their 40s now, and they all have after-school jobs. And I have to say, they turned out very well, and their sense of working and the benefits of that are still very evident.
So you can't possibly have children in your 40s, Helen. It brings up the issue of chores and responsibilities outside of just getting good grades. And my kids also all worked in various capacities when they could. I think that it's critical, actually. And the reason I think it's critical is back to this issue of what makes you feel like you're part of a community. I mean, kids who don't have any responsibilities other than to be these sort of shining stars and just get good grades have no sense that they're part of a community. And what's a child's first community? It's their home. So at the youngest age, give a kid a dish rag. So they love it. Now, they don't love it so much in adolescence when you ask them to clear the table. And the kid goes, oh no, I have a math test, I have to study tomorrow. And the parent goes, oh, your math test is much more important than clearing the table. But it's not. Clearing the table is more important because being part of a community has to do with being reliable and responsible. And that 10 minutes of grade grubbing really doesn't make any difference. So what you do when you insist that your child be productive in terms of having a job or a chore or something like that is to, I think, send the message that communities work on reciprocity. And, for those of you who have looked at this book, I mean, I'd like to clarify this for a minute, if I may. I'm not really talking about money. Money doesn't seem to be the issue. The issue is the culture of affluence, where materialism is more important than relationships and where competition is more important than cooperation, and where individualism is more important than reciprocity. So the kid who says, I have to get the test grade, I don't want to go to my job or clear the table, that child becomes self-centered, and the costs, we all know narcissistic people. The costs of narcissism don't accrue to the narcissist, they accrue to the people around them. So the kid goes into the room, and mom, who's worked all day long, has to clear the table and do the dishes. So I think kids feel good when they have a hand in their own lives, where where they feel like what they have accumulated, that they have a role. Kids always had a role because they had to in the family, milking the cows or getting up. And kids now, I mean, they are incredibly bored. How long can you study? And they don't have much of a role in life. I mean, it's very incumbent on adults to start saying, yes, you do have a job, yes, you do have a chore, yes, you're expected to do that, because it's not simply your grades or the school you get into that matters, but how you learn to be part of a community.
You could tell a story in that about the kid quite young, offered $2 to.
Oh yeah,
Can you tell that?
yeah, quickly. So this was a psychiatrist friend in Denver, and she had her son's friends over, and she had to go do some work. And she said, I'll give you guys $2 an hour to babysit. And the kid looked at her like she was crazy and said, I don't remember the number, I've got $1 million in my bank account. What do I want with $2?
Yeah, $2 million trust fund. You said.
$2 million trust fund, yeah.
It sounds like to some degree, I'm sorry, I have colds, my voice is weird, that there's been a correlation between the rise of these types of kids that you're seeing and the growth of the internet and online communities. I'm wondering if you have any point of view on the effect of spending a lot of time online or anything like that on these kids.
Yeah, I always get asked about the internet. I have mixed feelings about it. In some ways, obviously, it has opened up an astounding world. I think it's easy to sort of be skeptical of new technologies. Again, I think the issue is how reluctant parents are to exercise authority over things like the internet. We all know that there are parts of the internet that are really miserable. A lot of the kids I see are very involved in pornography on the internet. And can you imagine a question that comes to my office? A parent calls me up and goes, I've just discovered that my 13-year-old daughter is on 5 different pornography sites and her picture on Facebook is very seductive. Do you think I should do anything about it? My grandma could have answered that question. You don't need to pay me for that. There is this, the internet's a thing. It can be used well. Kids use it as a kind of constant communication. I can remember when I got a Princess phone and that was supposedly the end of the world because I wasn't having dinner, with my family all the time. I think well-regulated use of the internet, which means a half hour or an hour. Kids use the internet now. I saw somebody yesterday for 5 hours a day and insists that she can't start her homework until 11 or 12 and stays up till 4 because she's socializing on the internet. And Mom is like, well, that's a battle I don't want to fight. That's a battle she's supposed to fight. And I spoke with a woman who does the prosecuting for internet pornography and stuff like that, and I will be talking to her more. She was really vehement about keeping kids off internet sites. So there are these parent filters and things like that. And there is just the parental responsibility of making sure that your kid's not spending his life in pseudo-communication. I mean, everything is lost on internet communication except words. And we know that 80% of communication is nonverbal. So, it looks like a way of staying in touch. It's a very poor way of maintaining relationships.
A question on positive role models, particularly the parent as a person who's not saying do this, but who is living their own life in a way that the child sees a way of life that they want to emulate. Who are the role models and how do parents do that with this busyness currently?
Unfortunately, the role models are celebrities. I mean, we've become a celebrity culture, and we know that by where the rewards come. So the rewards come to people who can throw a basket into a hole and, who can act and things like that. It's very celebrity-driven. And if you ask kids who they want to be like or who their heroes are, they tend to come up with celebrities. Now, part of that is just who's visible to them. So it seems to me one of the things parents need to do is make other people visible to their children. We just met in Guatemala. My husband does third world medicine, and he's taken all 3 of our children down there to meet other people who are involved in other kinds of gifts, really, to the world. And to the extent to which we become obsessed or compelled by these sort of superficial and trivial things, oh my God, so-and-so's coming to town, then our children model after our own models. To the extent to which we're good role models, to the extent to which we say, I'm really less interested in your grade than I am in your integrity. which is a critical message and doesn't get across. And it doesn't get across because institutions don't always reward integrity. So we had that story at Marin Catholic. We had a story at Marin Catholic where kids had gotten some pornography off the internet and had put on the faces of their teachers and then papered the cars in the parking lot with these pornographic pictures of their teachers.
Oh my God.
And that school stood up to that. And that school presented a different model of integrity and said these kids aren't going to graduation and these kids aren't going to prom. And then the parents turned around and said, well, how could you deprive my child of the prom? So they had an alternate prom for them. So the school taught integrity, the parents didn't. So, yeah, so, parents really have to gut check themselves. And I think, parents' job is to expose the child to the world. Well, you can expose the child to the Ritz-Carlton or Casa, but you can also expose them to another side of the world where there are other people laboring, like your sort of love affair with the Padre up in Nuevo. And I think that's a critical part of being a parent. And it's something nobody ever talks about. Like, what have you done with my kid? I've done this, I've done that. What kind of people are you putting your kids in touch with? What kind of adults do you have them sit around a dinner table with and have a conversation with? So.
You might actually almost answer my question, but I was sort of in line with Alan's comment about gratitude. What role does volunteering and community service play in the children you've been exposed to from both the parental side and the children as well? And how important do you think that is in the community service aspect? How important is that in volunteering in these children's lives you're involved with?
That there's this explosion of community service in the schools right now. So kids have to do a certain, you're not going to like this, but kids have to do a certain number of community service hours. I am not a huge fan of those programs because they are seen by the kids, because I see a lot of kids, they are seen by the kids as one more thing to be gotten through. I got to spend, another 6 hours helping the poor kids or the dumb kids or this, that, and the other thing. And there's no integration, internal integration for them in terms of what it really means to be an active participant in somebody else's life. And this was part of the epiphany at St. John's because they had around a program where kids had gone out and spent substantial time and then had to report back to the community, back to the parish and to the church about what they had done, and then they had to speak to the younger children. So this notion of going out and spending 8 hours because your school says you have to do community service, at that level I don't see it as being very useful. There needs to be a way in which that becomes integrated. And we know something about how you integrate things. One of the ways you integrate things is by teaching other people. So there was this documentary that I'm in being filmed yesterday, and they're taking their spoiled daughter to India for 2 weeks. Taking her to India for 2 weeks is not going to change the person she is. If she comes back and speaks to other people and keeps her commitment up to this school and continues to have contact with them and is invested in them beyond the fact that it's going to help her grade and look good on her resume, then that's real community service. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Makika Basic. I'm a junior at George Washington High School. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting what you were talking about, really, about, because some of these kids are my friends, and, but I also have some friends that are poor. So I guess, well, I don't know. Because it seems like there's really categories for high school students based on their parents. And in a way that's not fair because, for example, I hate the internet. I think it's the worst thing that ever happened. And of course I've been ostracized by my friends because of that. But I think fashion is the second worst thing that ever happened. Fashion. I love volunteering. I tutor kids in biology and US history. and I'm involved in a few other things, but I haven't really had any hardships, and well, I'm comfortably middle class, but I feel sometimes that's a bad thing. That, you know, like, maybe I'm not as well off as these affluent kids, or I haven't faced as many hardships as my poorer friends. So, by categorizing the students, aren't we, in a way, forcing them into a role?
Well, you know, there are kids in, that's why I said it's not about money. So there can be great kids with a lot of money. There can be lousy kids with a lot of money. There can be great kids who have little money. And that's why I said I'm not really talking about money. I'm talking about subscription to a kind of culture. Now, I think for people with money, it often becomes, that culture of affluence often becomes a default because it's easy to throw money at a problem. But you sound like a great kid, and the things that you're doing for other people will stand you in good stead. I'm just sort of curious, aren't you bored by the kids who are superficial and not involved in this stuff? What?
Am I bored?
Yeah. Do you find them boring? Do you find some of those to be boring?
Well, that's like, for example.
Wait for the mic, could you? You're the last question, so we want to have you.
Well, I guess in a way, like I do have a friend who owns the Jimmy Choo bag, plus the Gucci Prada and the special edition Picasso. But I also have friends who, for example, the tutoring job I do, I'm actually working to pay off college exams. So it just really adds a different color, I guess, to the high school life. But I'm not bored by them, because they do have good stuff to add, I guess. Maybe showing as an example about maybe what we shouldn't do sometimes.
Bad example.
Rather a bad example. Well, you know, thank you for speaking up, because you're young and you're poised, and you should be proud of yourself. Is that your mom or your sister? It's your mother. So congratulations, you've done a great job.
We're going to have to stop. This has been one of the best and one of the most frustrating forums, because I love to spend all day with you. You're articulate. I think I want to say again that I can't recommend this book highly enough, not least because it's the prism to look at all our problems. And there is a deep subtext of spirituality on those three words that I will be talking about later. The whole notion of conscience, gratitude, and community. I think you've made a wonderful constellation of words to sort of help us understand that. So I want to thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Anna will be available afterwards to autograph her book. Copies are available at the back. And I would ask you just to please be gentle and courteous to allow her to get to the back of the room, because I know you want more. But our next forum on education and parenting will be February the 4th, not long, far ahead, with Norton Grove and Lucy Burke, who will join us to discuss the state of domestic education, the education system. Next week we're welcoming an old friend of mine, a priest from England, Jim Potter, to discuss spirituality, poetry, prayer, a thoughtful conversation for the Anglican community. He's been through a great deal. We were teachers together in 1968. And I directed him as Sir Thomas More in A Man for All Seasons, where the setting was actually a 15th century living room. And so you will enjoy him. He's had an amazing career, known for deep spirituality, great preaching, and what it has been like to be a gay man in the church, known for his deep spirituality. So I do commend him to you. Please remember we rely on your financial support to make the forum possible, so please contribute what you can. And as always, we invite you to join us for the liturgy upstairs at 11 o'clock. Grace Cathedral is proud to be known as a house of prayer for all people without exception. And Madeline, again, it was a wonderful hour.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you very, very much. Good to meet you. Yes. We've lost a sense of what the purpose of education is. You know, Madeline, if we're ever good in San Francisco, children, education, and quickness, will happen. Really good, dangerous. And with that in mind, what happens is we lost really a perception of what it is to be a child. And in that, I wanted her to speak directly to two aspects. It's not really teaching you learn early and reinforce constantly. They are. I don't think you know. I'll see you next week. Come back to a broken